You're watching Gears.
You're watching Gears.
Hey, welcome to Gears. You know, some of the biggest challenges that a gearhead's gonna face when they're laying out their project is how do you make it reliable, keep it cool, and not blow your budget? Good questions. Now, the only answers to that is you have got to plan the project out, you gotta spend your money wisely on the right parts, and you've got to do the work yourself. Now, if you do these three things, you're gonna be surprised what you end up with. Now, if you are trying to keep your costs down and still have something cool, well, there are all kinds of 70s, 80s, and 90s vehicles out there, and they are cheap. I mean, I'm talking Monte Carlos and Mustangs and El Caminos and Camaros and all kinds of trucks. But whatever you find is probably gonna end up looking something like this. Okay, what we've got here is a 1973 Chevy pickup, and the last time it was really worked on was sometime in the late 80s, which explains why it looks like it does, with the little Krager wheels and the tube grill and the teal paint. I mean, all this thing is missing is some parachute pants, but it's got a lot bigger problems than that. I mean, the motor and transmission completely worn out. My first car had a shifter like this. The brakes, whoa, no brakes. Son, just a distant memory. The suspension is completely shot. There's some insane body lean, man. And the worst part is, the stereo only plays Boy George songs. The good news is, it is easy to bring something like this back to life, bring it up to date, and make it cool. So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna dig into this project. We're gonna call it the Knucklebuster, because this is something that anybody can do as long as you're willing to do the work yourself and bust your knuckles. Okay, the first thing that we're gonna deal with is the stance. Now, as you can see, these trucks have huge wheel wells, and we need something a lot bigger than these little weenies to fill them up. But we're not just gonna put bigger wheels and tires on. No, we're gonna lower this truck too, but we're not gonna slam it all the way to the ground, because the owners of this truck, very similar to most of you guys, they'd like to drive this every day. So we're gonna drop it 3 inches in the front, 4 inches in the rear. That's gonna give us a nice, low, mean look, but it's not gonna destroy the use of the truck as a hauler. This is how we're gonna do it. Come on. This is a DJM suspension system, and we ordered it right out of the Style & Trucks catalog. Now, the cool thing about this is it completely replaces your stock upper and lower control arms with these big, heavy-duty tubular guys. Take a look at these. There's your upper control arms. Notice you got your bushings installed and the ball joints are in place. And then this is your lower control arm. Now, once again, take a look. Got the urethane bushings in place, bump stops, and the ball joint. Now, to go with this, we also got some performance shocks to finish it off. Now, the cool thing about this setup is all that 3-inch drop is engineered into these control arms. That means you reuse your stock spindle and your stock spring if you want to. That can save you some serious money. But the best part about this system is how easy it goes in. Let's get to it. All right, with the wheel out of the way, now you can see why we didn't have too good of brakes. Look at that, that rotor is shot. So it's time to start taking things apart. Shocks come off, rotor, caliper, everything's got to go. Now, don't be surprised if you run into a little problem with your brake hoses here, because they are notorious for rusting in place, and they can swell shut over time. So now is a perfect time to replace those. That's why we call this the Knucklebuster. All right, with a jack under the control arm to support the spring, time to bring out the big gun. We'll use this to separate the tie rod end and the ball joints from the spindle so we can remove it. Then we'll just lower the jack and pull out the spring. Well, what do you think? It's not too bad so far. From here on out, it gets even easier because these control arms just pop off with just a couple of bolts. So let's get to it. Okay, now comes the time in the project where you're gonna get really dirty, because you definitely don't want to put this nice stuff up against that old nasty frame and cross member. No, make sure you take a few minutes to clean everything up. You're gonna be glad you did. Now we are ready to start putting on these new control arms, and they just bolt in place using the stock hardware. Next comes the spring, and here it is. Now, I know some of you guys are looking at this going, wait a minute. I thought you said you were gonna reuse your stock spring. Well, that is what this is. I just cleaned it up, shot it with some of this hammer tone paint, and it looks like brand new. Now we're ready for the spindles and the brakes. And instead of messing around trying to rebuild this mess, we're just gonna totally get rid of it and replace it with this stainless steel brake system that we got from Style & Trucks. Now, the heart of this system are these new spindles that have been modified to fit the big brakes. And you can see I hit them with the hammer tone paint to make them look good. Then what bolts to these are these big 4-piston calipers. Those are gonna give us the clamping force we need to bring that truck to a stop. Then they clamp on these 13-inch slotted rotors. That's about 2 inches bigger than our original rotor. Of course, they come, look at this, they got all the new bearings and the hardware, the hoses, everything that you're gonna need to actually put this in your shop. Now, you might be looking at this going, you know, is this really necessary? Well, look at it this way. You were gonna have to completely rebuild this anyway. New rotor, caliper, bearings, and by the time you do that, you're gonna have brand new 1973 brakes. It is a much wiser investment. Spend a little extra money and get a modern performance brake system. This is one of the smartest things that you can do on an older vehicle, especially if you're going to drive it a lot. The best part is everything just bolts in place of the stock pieces. And that takes care of the front. Now, you're not gonna get the full impact of this until we put some wheels and tires on here and get it down on the ground. But at least you know now it's gonna stop and handle better than it used to. That's for sure. All right, time to move on to the rear. Come on. Now, the rear drop is similar to the front drop in the fact that it reuses your stock springs. Other than that, it's completely different. But that doesn't mean it's not something that you can't do. Matter of fact, in a lot of ways, this is an easier deal back here, because in the rear, you just utilize this drop shackle, and then in the front, you've got this relocation bracket. So the first thing we have to do is get a jack under the rear end and unbolt these leaf springs. So make sure you got plenty of lube because you're gonna need it. Once everything is unbolted, we'll lower the rear end and get it out of the way. Then we'll follow that with the leaf springs. Smoke it. Now, modifying the rear shackle is as simple as replacing this little short one with this much taller one that comes with the kit. And it just drops into the stock hanger, and that is all there is to it. Now, the front hanger, that's a whole different deal, because these stock rivets have got to come out, and the best tool to use is an air hammer and a chisel. Now, just bolt the new bracket in place using the stock rivet holes and the new hardware. Since we have stainless steel brakes on the front, it's only fitting that we use their conversion kit on the rear. Now check this out, this is a pretty cool deal. You got new rotors, you've got calipers with emergency brakes all built in, got all your hoses and hardware to where you can convert from drums on the rear to discs. Now, the good news is you don't have to pull the rear end like this to do this. You can actually do it right on the vehicle. We've just got this out because we're going to paint it. The bad news is this doesn't go on quite as easy as that front brake system that was just bolted on, but it's still something that you can do. Take a look. The thing that makes some people nervous about doing this style of conversion on a C-clip style rear end is that you have to pull the axle out to get this backing plate off. But before you can pull the axle out, you have to go into the rear end and release the C-clip so you can pull the axle out. But really, it's not that big a deal, because all you've got to do is pull off the cover, remove the pinion shaft, then just push the axles in to release the C-clips. Then, with the axles pulled out of the way, you can unbolt the backing plates. Okay, the first new piece to go on this axle is this caliper mounting bracket. It just slides onto the rear end and bolts in place. Now, once you have it on, you can slide your axle back in. Now, when you reinstall the axle, you want to take your time so that you don't tear up the rubber seal out here on the end of the axle shaft. Now, the C-clip. It's got it. Follow that with the dust shields and the caliper mounting hardware. And at this point, the only thing left to do is slide the rotors on, then install the calipers on the brackets. Now, obviously, we are not going to reuse these stock brake lines because, first of all, they're rusty. Second of all, a brake caliper needs to be able to move a little bit. That's why the kit comes with hoses and hard lines. So what you need to do is grab one of these lines and bend it up so that it fits over the rear end, comes down, and is held in place with a factory tab. Then you just connect it to the hose, make sure you have plenty of slack, and you're ready to go. And that is it. The brakes are on, the rear end is ready to go back in the vehicle. After you spend some time cleaning it up and putting some paint on it. Don't you put it back in the vehicle looking like this. You know better than that. At this point, we are ready for the final step of a suspension and brake upgrade, and that is wheels and tires. Now, obviously, these old Krager SS's have a classic 5-spoke look, and we want to keep that style, but we don't want to go with this size. Now, we need to upgrade them a little bit. So, we went to our buddies at Billet Specialties, and we got what they call the dagger wheel. Now, take a look at this. It's obviously a 5-spoke, but it's completely different. It's all polished aluminum, has huge windows here, and has ribs running right down the spokes. This is a very aggressive looking wheel. Now, the size that we're using is the really big news, because the fronts we're using 18x8s, and on the rears we're using a 20x10. Yeah, it's a lot different than those little 15s. Now, tires, the same thing. We needed something aggressive and something that was modern. So we went to our friends at Nitto, got what they call the NT420S. As you can see, it's got a very aggressive tread, but it's also a modern performance tire. So this old truck is going to handle like a new car, which is great. Now, the size that we're using on the front is a 255/50, and on the rear is a 285/50, because we need something huge to fill up this big old square wheel well. And this is it. As you can see, in just a short period of time, we've taken something that was completely neglected and dated looking, and giving it a completely different attitude. Now take a look at this. Look how the wheel wells are now filled out and all the gaps are about the same, and got a great hot rod rake happening here. And we also upgraded the braking and the handling at the same time. The best part is, this is something that you can reasonably do in the course of a weekend in your own garage. And that is what Gears is all about. This week, we're going to tackle one of the major issues that everybody faces when they dive into a project: engine and drivetrain. And there it is, an old worn out 350 with all kinds of leaks and all kinds of evidence of some pretty creative mechanical work here. Now, when you're faced with a situation like this and you don't know the history, you don't know what kind of hacking's been done over the years on something, the best thing to do is pull it all out and just start over. That way you can methodically handle all the problems as they come up, and when you're all done, everything is new. That way you don't accidentally keep something like this that can cause you a serious problem down the road. Since the whole drivetrain is going to come out, the easiest way to do this is to pull off the whole front clip. That way you'll have complete and total access to the drivetrain in the front end. With that done, pulling out the engine and transmission is a breeze. Now, if you are going to reuse your stock wiring harness, make sure that you take a few minutes and mark where they go. This will help you when you go to put the project back together. However, as old and brittle as this stuff gets, it's best just to replace it. There it comes. Oh, like butter. That's why we call it the Knucklebuster. Okay, just a hair higher. Pull it back. Okay, take it up. Okay, pull it back. We're clear.
A successful automotive project takes planning and organization. But instead of using an old tablet or notebook, there's the Gears Deluxe Project Planning Book. This was designed to help you lay out a project, the parts, the tools, costs, and keep it organized with colored tabs, a pouch for receipts, and even a place to attach photos. If you decide to sell the vehicle, it serves as a complete history of what's been done. If you have a project or plan on starting one, the Gears Project Planning Book is the best way to lay it out and make it happen.
Now it's cleanup time. And if you haven't decided on a color for your vehicle, this is the time to do it. You got great access to the firewall and the frames, a perfect time to paint them. Now, for this truck, we're going to use this SEM Hot Rod Black. Now, it's not a flat black, it's a satin color, which is just going to make this truck look evil. So that's what's going to go into the hood, too. All right, when it comes to a new engine, most people will go with some sort of a crate engine because that's a lot easier than rebuilding this. So we went to our buddies at Style & Trucks and got this GM Performance 350 crate engine. Now this thing is kicking out 350 horsepower, which makes it a lot more powerful than that, and it's gonna make that truck a lot of fun out on the road. The problem is, as you can see, it's not the most attractive thing, and there's no accessories here on the front. But we got the solution to both of these problems. Come on. This is a complete GM Performance accessory system designed to go right with that crate engine. Now take a look at this, man. You got all kinds of pulleys and hardware. You got a new alternator, new air conditioning compressor, new power steering pump, all kinds of brackets, everything that you're gonna need to put a modern serpentine system onto your engine. Now, the key to any good-looking engine is the right amount of paint, polish, and detail. So, to make all this stuff look good, we're not only gonna paint it, we're also going to add these accessories we got from Summit Racing. Now look at this. These are Cal Custom finned aluminum valve covers, matching breathers, and a matching air cleaner, and a matching oil pan. Now once we get all this stuff painted up and detailed, you're going to be surprised how good it looks. All right, with the engine painted, first thing we're going to put on is this oil pan. Now, one thing that a lot of people overlook when they're putting on custom accessories is hardware. For example, you don't want to put that old nasty junk up against a polished and painted engine. No. So what do? Well, you may want to invest in one of these Gardner Westcott dress-up kits. And this is all polished stainless steel hardware for the oil pan, the intake manifold, the headers, pretty much all of your exterior accessories. And this particular kit comes with a little bow tie embossed right in the heads for a really cool custom look. Of course, you can get them for Ford, Chevy, Dodge, pretty much anything you're working on. We'll follow that up with the valve covers, the breathers, and the air cleaner, and we've got an engine that looks a lot different than what we started with. Now, with all this junk out of the way, it's the perfect time to deal with all this other mess under the hood. As you can see, this old steering box is leaking all over the place, and it's completely worn out, as is all of this steering linkage. Now, if you replace your suspension components like we did last week, and you leave all of this junk, well, what you're going to end up with is a cool lowered truck that still wanders all over the road. You don't want that. The good news is all of this stuff is cheap, and it's just a phone call away. Let's take a look. The steering parts come from a place called LMC Truck. And if you've got an old truck, you need to pick up one of their catalogs, because these guys carry just about anything that you can imagine. And most of this stuff would be really hard to find at a local auto parts store. For example, we've got a brand new power steering box and all the hoses. We have a new center link, new inner and outer tie rod ends with adjusters. We have the idler arm and a pitman arm. Now, instead of just bolting these things on all black and ugly, once again, we took just a few minutes and painted them with this Rust-Oleum hammer tone paint. This is about the toughest thing that you can spray on right out of a can. So you save yourself some money there, and as you can see, it looks incredible. Now, we also got some stuff that did not come stock on the truck, like front and rear sway bars and a steering stabilizer. Now, the rear sway bar and the steering stabilizer both came, once again, from LMC Truck, because these are for a stock application. They'll just bolt right on. The front sway bar, we got that from Style & Trucks, because remember, we have modified control arms on this truck. So we needed a sway bar that would work with the modified control arms. Now, this is really important when you are piecing something together like this, that you order the right parts so you don't have a big surprise when you go put it all together. Now, all of this stuff, along with that lowered suspension, is going to make that truck handle like crazy, which is something it did not do when we first drove it. Installing the new steering box and linkage is pretty much a bolt-in deal once you got everything cleaned up and painted. And it's definitely a lot easier with the front clip removed. The new sway bar utilizes existing holes in the frame, and once again, it just bolts into place. Wow, what a difference a few $100 in just a couple hours makes. Check it out. Now, we are going to deal with this mess. Because remember, we got brand new brakes on this thing, and then this old nasty master cylinder. So, we're going to replace that with this one from Stainless Steel Brakes and a power booster, because we want to put on power brakes. Now, servicing and maintaining brakes brings up a whole bunch of questions. So that brings up this. You know, everybody understands how important your brakes are. But when it comes to bleeding or flushing the system, that's where things get iffy for a lot of folks. So for today's Tool Tech, we're going to feature some tools from Phoenix Systems. They're going to completely change the way you approach your brakes and keep them working to their full potential. Okay, the first thing that we're going to look at is bleeding the brakes. Now, in the past, the scenario has always been you get Cousin Eddie or Aunt Thelma inside pushing on the pedal while you're down opening and closing the bleed screws at the wheels. And in doing this, hopefully you run all the air down and out through the bleed screws. The problem with this, other than Cousin Eddie hitting the pedal at the wrong time, is that you're shoving that air in exactly the wrong direction. The air wants to rise. So Phoenix Systems came out with this tool called the Max Pro, and instead of pulling the air down through the lines, it forces the fluid in at the caliper or the slave cylinder. Then it pushes all the air up and out the top of the master cylinder reservoir, which is where it wanted to go anyway. And in just a few short minutes, you have got the best, firmest pedal that you can get. And the good news is, this is something one guy can do. No more Cousin Eddie. And this system works great on any small hydraulic system, brakes, clutches, whatever you're working on. Now, a lot of you know that you have to change your fluid from time to time, purge the system. The question is, when do you do it? I mean, this isn't just something you look at the fluid and say it's dirty, it's time to change it. That is where these brake strips come in, because these measure the amount of copper in the fluid, and the copper level goes up as your corrosion increases, and high levels of copper can damage your expensive ABS systems in your newer vehicles. So, copper is not a good thing. To test, all you have to do is dip the strip into the fluid and wait for it to change color. The darker the purple it gets, the more copper you got in your fluid. As you can see, it's time to flush this system and put in some new fluid. So, if you are serious about keeping your brakes in top working condition, man, forget about the way you've done it in the past. Check out these tools from Phoenix Systems at brakebleeder.com. They will make your life a whole lot easier, which is what a good tool is supposed to do. With the engine all cleaned up and detailed, it's ready to go in the vehicle, right? Well, you know, we do need to do something about the transmission. So instead of rebuilding that old nasty one, we got this new B&M Turbo 350 and this 2400 whole shot torque converter from Summit Racing. Now this combination is going to give us great launches, going to give us firm shifts, and plenty of beef to handle that 350 horse or more if we want to add it later on. The first thing to do is install the torque converter into the transmission, making sure it's seated all the way in. Then bolt the transmission and converter to the engine. And finally lay it all to rest in its new home. That's awesome, man. With the engine in place, now comes the fun part, because it's time to start putting your accessories on. Now we've got some ceramic coated headers from Style & Trucks. We've got new throttle cables from Locar. We've got all of our brakes and all of our other accessories. Now is the time to put them on. All right, here we go. Quite a bit different than what we started out with. Now, we're just about ready to put the front clip back on this thing. But before we do that, a few things I want to show you. Now, we've been pretty lucky on this project because most of these original body panels are really solid, but not all of them. Take a look at this. This core support's rusting out here in the bottom. The cancer goes all the way under the battery here and into these inner fenders. So, we're going to replace those with this new core support and inner fenders from LMC Truck. Now, these are just bolt-on replacements, so once you get them on, then you can put your front clip back on. All right, the last thing that you want to consider when you're doing this kind of major engine surgery is your cooling system. Now, if your radiator looks like that, you got yourself a problem. And we're going to deal with that problem with this new aluminum radiator from Flexolite. Now, check this thing out. It's a big, heavy-duty radiator, not only designed for that engine, but for air conditioning or whatever hot situation we want to subject it to. Now, for fans, we got these dual electric fans that are built right for this radiator, and they're designed to give us enough airflow to keep everything cool. Now, to go with this, we also got an auxiliary transmission cooler because we want that transmission to survive for a long time. The best part is all of this stuff pretty much bolts in place of that. You know, one of the biggest mistakes that people make when they put a more powerful engine and transmission in their project is that they don't do anything about the rear end to help you get that power to the pavement. Now, granted, most people would want a locker or a limited slip in the rear of their vehicle, but they don't do it because they don't think they can. And that is where you're wrong, because this is something that you can do. But to prove that, we got to go back in time, back to where the rear end was out of this vehicle. There it is, the area that most gearheads avoid like a trip to the doctor, which is ironic because inserting a locker into this rear end is simple and won't hurt a bit. Trust me, I'm a doctor. Okay, the first thing that comes out is the pinion shaft. We're going in. Now you can push in the axles to release the C-clips, and then just pull out the axles. Now that that's over, it's time to have some fun because we are going to gut this case and get rid of all this bad stuff, starting with these spider gears, followed with the side gears. All right, now that we've got everybody in a state of panic here, we probably ought to show you the locker that we're going to use. Now, we got this from Summit Racing. It's built by Power Tracks, and it basically replaces everything we just took off with a functional locker. Now, come on in here, check this out. You got drivers, you got couplers, you got spacers, and then you've got a few springs. That is it. This is how to put it on. First, we'll grease up the teeth of the drivers and the spacers, and seat the saddle springs into their holes. Then install the couplers into the case where the side gears were. At this point, the ring gear side axle can be slid back in and the C-clip installed. Next, we're ready for the driver and spacer assemblies, and the ring gear side goes in first, followed by the other side. Okay, with the drivers in place, we've got to do something to keep them there. So we're just going to rotate this axle about a quarter of a turn, revealing that spring slot. Then we'll take these little springs, double them up, and pop them in the slot. Now, at this point, you're probably getting a little concerned because it seems like we have forgotten to put on the other C-clip that holds this axle in place. And obviously, there's no room to put it on now, right? Now, all you got to do is rotate the axle. Look at this. You got a slot right there. Drop in the clip, and pull out on the axle to seat it. Of course, the final piece to go in is the new pinion shaft and the retaining bolt to hold it in place. And you've got yourself a locker. All right, we are all done in here. So now we're going to clean up this housing, put a coat of paint on there so this thing looks great when we put it back in the truck. The last piece that we're going to put on to go with these disc brakes is this polished aluminum cover we got from Summit Racing, because that will give us a great looking rear end, which is always important. We are going to dive into another major area that always seems to need some help, and it's right where you live, the interior. Now, keep in mind that this truck belongs to a family that has some young kids, and they want to be able to carry them around comfortably and safely. So, as you can see, we've got some work to do in here. The good news is, out of all the things that we've done to this vehicle so far, revamping the interior is the easiest one to do. Something that you can probably do in a weekend. So, let's get to work. The first thing to do is get everything out of the way. Seats, carpet, everything. All right, the big question is, what are we going to find behind this seat? Remember, the last time it was worked on was the late 80s. So what do you think's behind there? There they are, speakers blowing right into the back of the seat. Obviously, all of this stuff needs to go too. You didn't hear that. Now this is very typical of what you'll find in an older vehicle. And notice somebody's put some new carpet in here at one time, but they also used just a bunch of cheap foam as a sound deadener, as well as tried to reuse all this old nasty stuff. So we're gonna get rid of all this because there's a better way to do this. Okay, if you're doing a project like this and you want it to come out like that, well, obviously you're gonna need some new parts. And for a truck like this, that's as simple as going to LMC Truck and ordering what you need. Now, the first thing that's gonna go on that floor is this sound deadener. Now, this is a heavy-duty asphalt-based material, just like the original, and it's gonna hold sound down. Then we have this heat shield that's going to keep heat and sound from the drivetrain from getting into the cab. And then, of course, we got brand new carpet. Now, if you haven't decided what color your interior and your vehicle is going to be, now is the time to do it. But we're not just doing carpet here. No, we also got a new tilt steering column, a stereo system, air conditioning vents, gauges, bezel, seat belts, door panels. We've got everything we're going to need to make that truck better than it was new. Now, if your floors are solid, all you have to do is set the sound deadener in place and mold it in. Now, we were really lucky on this project because these floors were just solid as a rock. Of course, it spent most of its life inside a garage. Now, if you've got rust in your floors, you got to cut it out and you got to weld in new metal. But if you just have surface rust like this, you don't have to cut that out. That's good and strong. All you have to do is hit that with something like this Bill Hirsch Miracle Paint. Now, what this does is seal up that metal, doesn't let any moisture or any air get to it, and stops the rust. Now, once you got your floor all covered and treated, got your sound deadener on, now you're ready for your heat shield. This just lays in and is held in place by the supplied tape. Finally, in goes the carpet, and that's just a matter of fitting it around the door sills and the transmission hump and smoothing the wrinkles out. Okay, now that we have this floor mess taken care of, we are going to turn our attention to another mess in here, and that is the dash. Now, as is typical on an older vehicle like this, especially a truck, this started out life as a standard shift on the column. Then it was converted to an automatic on the floor, but you still got the standard shift column, and you got a whole mess going here. So we're not only going to get rid of the column, we're going to get rid of the old gauges, the dash, basically strip this whole thing out and start over. All right, with all this old wiring out of the way, let me talk to you about the wisest investment you're going to make on your project, a new wiring harness. Now, a lot of people don't realize that over time, your wiring can get brittle, that means it can crack, and that means it's susceptible to setting your vehicle on fire. That's why you see a lot of classic vehicles burning up on the side of the road. They didn't replace a wiring harness. Now, this harness comes from Painless Performance, and it's a direct replacement to what was in that truck. Now, check this out. You got your fuse block that goes right to the firewall like the original. Then these wires here are for everything in the cab. Air conditioning, heater, dash, lights, stereo, everything you want to put on that vehicle, it's already wired up, ready to go. Now, this harness here is your underhood harness. Plugs in at the firewall just like the original. And then this is for your motor, headlights, tail lights, everything that's outside the cab. Now, I know some of you guys are looking at this going, you make it sound easy, but that is a lot of wiring. I can't do that. Let me show you something that Painless has been doing for a long time. If you notice, about every 5 inches, the wires actually have printed on them where they go. So that makes this pretty much just a plug-and-play deal.
You know, one of the first true freedoms you experience as a kid is that first bicycle. Man, it becomes your transportation to the world, or at least the local neighborhood. And in my neighborhood, man, we all had bikes. And we'd stick playing cards in the spokes, and we'd suck on black licorice, make it look like we were big biker dudes, and it was magic. But a bike wasn't just about transportation. No, it became an extension of your personality. And there were all kinds of bikes out there. There were 10 speeds, there were mountain bikes, there were Stingrays, there were BMX bikes, and they all had their strengths and weaknesses. And that's where the idea for the story of the purple bicycle came from. Because just like a bike might wish it had the talents or skills of another bike, so do we sometimes overlook our God-given talents and wish we had somebody else's talents, skills, because they seem to be better than ours. It's a simple lesson, but something we all need to be reminded of from time to time.
Now this may look intimidating at first, but you're gonna find that Painless has everything well marked, so it's just a matter of plugging it in and routing your wires. Next, we'll pull out the old junky gauges that don't work anymore and replace them with the new ones from LMC Truck. The crowning touch to any restoration project is the dash. Now, as you can see, this is not just one of those phony, cheap little covers. No, this is a full padded dash. It's gonna go right in place of that junk we took off. Here we go. Yeah, nice. We'll follow that up with the bezel and the vents and the trim. Then we'll stick in the new stereo and hook up all the wiring. Yeah, looking pretty good in here, but we are not done yet. No, the next thing to go in this dash is this new steering column. Now, since this is designed to fit right in this body style of truck, it's gonna bolt right in and it's gonna hook right up to that new wiring harness. Man, you gotta love that. All right, slide it in. Now, we're gonna top off that steering column with this Dagger wheel from Billet Specialties. Now, if you think that Dagger name sounds familiar, well, you're right, because it matches the Dagger wheels on the truck. Take a look at this. You got the same design in the spokes on the steering wheel as you do on the wheels on the truck. That is cool, but that's not all. We also have a leather half wrap on the steering wheel, plus this smooth billet adapter that flows right into the horn button. This is gonna look incredible on that polished column. As you can see, the interior still has a stock look to it because that's just cool. Except now, it's all brand new, just like it was in '73. Except, we did upgrade the steering column with a modern tilt system. We have a new stereo in it and a new speaker up in the dash. Let me tell you, a single speaker is not gonna get it on this project. So we're gonna expound on that with these new kick panels with speakers built right in. And if you look up, we have a new headliner panel with 4 speakers blowing right down on your head. So no more speakers behind the seat, no more problems hearing the music. The best part is, all of these panels are available from LMC Truck. They slide right in place of the originals. All you have to do is hook them up. Now, for door panels, you got a couple of choices here. Once you have the door painted the way you want it, take your new door panel and just slide it in place of the original, like that, and it's just held in place with these screws. Now, if that's the look that you like, you can stop right there. But if you want a little more plush looking, or if somebody has cut some big holes down here for some speakers, yeah, you know who you are, that is what this panel is for. Now, it just sits in place and is held on with these screws. At this point, there's really only one thing left to do on the interior. It's a big one, the seat. Now, remember, this truck is owned by a family that has small children, so obviously they want as much usable space as they can get, and a bench seat will do that for you. Come on, take a look. Now, you can buy brand new aftermarket seats and just bolt them into the vehicle, but the best bang for your buck on a project like this is to reupholster your stock seats. Now, I know some of you are looking at this going, oh man, I don't know anything about upholstery work. Well, now is the perfect time to learn, and you're gonna be surprised how easy it is. The first thing you'll need to do is disassemble the seat back from the seat bottom, and then remove the hog rings and pull off the old upholstery.
Now, if your seat cushions are worn out, now is the time to replace them, because your new upholstery will never fit right if your seat cushions are all broken down and worn out like these are. Look at this. We're right on the metal there. And then years ago, somebody tried to put a bunch of filler material to try to fill in this indentation. So we're gonna get rid of all this junk. And these pads just lift off of the seat frame, go to the junk pile, and then the new piece just lays right on the seat frame. Once the pads are in place, make sure the upholstery is nice and warm, and then turn it inside out and just slip the upholstery down over the cushion, unrolling it as you go. Now make sure you take your time here, because you can rip the upholstery if you try to go too fast and force it. Now it's just a matter of pulling the upholstery tight as you continually work out the wrinkles. Then, using the supplied hog rings, attach both sides of the upholstery under the seat. Once you have both sections upholstered, all you have to do is reassemble the seat, and she's ready to go back in. Right there. Oh yeah. Now, the moment of truth. For those of you who thought you didn't have the time, the ability, or the money to redo the interior of your project, check it out. It's comfortable, usable, affordable, and it looks good. And this is something that you can really do yourself over the weekend. So now you have no excuse to ride around in this when you could be riding around in that. Now, there is one part that still needs to go back on, and that, of course, is the hood. We pulled that off because it's a lot easier to hook up a new wiring harness if you got the hood out of the way. However, we are not going to put this original style hood back on. No, we got something a lot cooler than this. Check it out. This is LMC's all-steel cowl induction hood. And they make these things for just about any truck you can imagine. So you're good to go no matter what you're driving. Now, not only is it steel, but it's got a functional cowl induction scoop built right in. And then the backside is completely finished out with a steel inner panel just like the original hood. But the best thing about these hoods is how easy they are to put on. All you have to do is transfer the latching hardware from the original hood and bolt this sucker on. After that, we hooked up with Malcolm and the boys at West Kentucky Collision Center, where they smoothed out the flanks and laid on some new color.
But I do enjoy the show, and it's been, I appreciate you giving us the opportunity. It's been really fun, cool, exciting to be a part of this.
Now, just in case you're thinking that this is just a boring old flat black, oh no, think again. This is a PPG finish called eggshell, and the flattening look comes from the clear that you shoot over the color. So you can get this effect out of any color that you want to shoot on your vehicle. Now, the cool thing about this eggshell stuff is that you can shoot it as a straight flat like this, or you can mix it as a satin or a semi-gloss, so you can get exactly the primer or suede look that you want out of your vehicle. This would be a great color on anything from a nostalgic hot rod to a late model car truck. Now, the final touch was some airbrushing by Steve Ray of Airbrush Inc., and it features a beat-up hand with some bloody knuckles to remind you what it takes to build something like this. Now, if you'll remember, the truck had a tubular-style grille on it from the 80s. And while that was a step in the right direction, a lot has changed with grills since then, both in the way they look and in the way they fit. Now, what we've got here
is a billet aluminum grill from LMC Truck, and if you'll notice, everything is powder coated black on it, except for the leading edge of the bars, which of course is polished. Now what this does is make these bars look very long and thin, and it also makes them look like they're floating in that grill opening all by themselves. It's a great look, and this is going to be really cool on a black truck. Since the grill sits in front of the stock hood latch, an extension rod needs to be added to relocate the lever. Then the grill just bolts in place using the supplied hardware. All right, the next thing to go on is headlights and bumpers. So we went back to LMC Trucks, picked up some of these Euro style headlights because they not only throw more light further down the road, they also look really cool. Now to go with these, we also got these clear turn signal lenses and the amber bulbs to keep them legal. And then we got some new chrome headlight bezels. Then to finish everything off, we got some new bumpers. Check these out. Now notice these are a lot smaller and less cumbersome than the original bumpers, and they have driving lights built right into them. These are going to be great on that truck. All of these new front end pieces just bolt right in place of the stock parts. And when you've got them all on, you can see how well they all work together to really clean up the front end of these old Chevys. We also got a new rear bumper. Now, as you can see, it matches the style of that front bumper perfectly, except of course there's no driving lights. Now, hopefully, this thing's gonna bolt right in place. Wrong. Since the rear frame had been buggered up some to hold the old bumper, we needed to fix that first. Also, since the original rear bumper bracket disappeared back with Jimmy Hoffa, we got some of those new from LMC Truck too. And that's it for the bumpers and trim. Now, while we're back here, what about this bed? I mean, it looks fine the way it is, but it sure would be great to have some wood back here, don't you think? Yeah, but how is that possible? I mean, we got a metal floor here. That is what we're gonna show you next. Come on. This is a system that comes from Bruce Horkey's Wood and Parts, and this is called the show deck. And the whole idea behind the show deck is to allow you to mount a wood bed over the top of your stock original bed. Now, the show deck, as you can see, comes with top quality oak planks that are already pre-cut and sanded notch to fit your bed perfectly. And of course, they come with the stainless steel strips to really finish them off. Now, at this point, it looks like a typical wood bed, right? What makes the show deck different is all of this hardware that allows you to mount this right over the top of your stock bed and then still be able to remove it in just a few minutes. Now, of course, you got to have a good finish on the wood, so the kit also comes with top quality varnish, brushes, hardware, everything that you're going to need to do that. Now, I know some of you guys are looking at this, you're kind of skeptical. Well, I tell you what, we're going to put this all together and you are going to be surprised how well this looks. With the main pieces in place, it's just a matter of installing the outer boards around the wheel wells. Once again, squaring them up and clamping them in place with the skid strips. Remember, since all beds are just a little bit different, don't be surprised if you have to massage the boards a little bit to get them to fit perfectly. The final piece to go on is the polished rear sill plate that adds a nice finishing touch to the bed. Yeah, what a difference that makes. Now, if you'll notice, the show deck only sits about 1.5 inches above the stock metal bed. Once you get that tailgate on there, you're not even gonna notice that. The best part about this show deck, though, is it comes out in about 5 minutes. All you gotta do is pull out one of the center strips and take out the 2 sections. You don't even have to disassemble them. That way, if you need to carry a big old greasy engine in here, you just pop out the wood, throw in the engine, and that way you don't mess up your wood. The last thing we're going to deal with is the exhaust system. And for that, we went to MagnaFlow and got one of their full stainless steel dual exhaust systems to really bring that thing alive. Now check this out. All the stainless steel tubing is pre-bent, so it's going to fit right where it needs to go. All your hangers are welded in place, and the ends are flared. So basically they just slip together, and when you put a clamp on that, that's not going to leak. Then, of course, we have 2 polished stainless steel mufflers to give us the sound and the flow that we're after. And then we finish it off with all the clamps and all the hardware to actually be able to mount this thing on the truck. So, let's get to it. The first thing to do is get rid of the old exhaust system and penetrating lube, deep well sockets, and a Sawzall do wonders on rusty brackets and old nasty pipe. Once the old junk's out of the way, the MagnaFlow system just lays in place and fits like it should. And that drives home the importance of buying a quality exhaust system that is designed to fit your particular vehicle. Because the last thing that you want to do is spend the afternoon laying under your vehicle trying to make something fit that doesn't. And that finishes off the Knucklebuster project. And as you can see, it's a lot different than what we started out with. What we have here is basically a brand new 1973 Chevy pickup. And by choosing your parts wisely and doing the work yourself, this is something that just about anybody can do for a heck of a lot less money than it would take you to go down and buy yourself a brand new truck. And if that's not motivation, I don't know what is. Now, we do have one last thing to do. We have to give it back to the Burtons after we take it out and break it in properly. Going in.